the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet because we've got some news that we've got to dissect today. But before we do, we got to make sure that the stream is functioning. And it looks like the connections may have been connected. And so we can get started. Let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we've got some bad verdict news. Michael Sussmann, not guilty. What? Are you serious? Did they watch the same trial that we watched? Have they been following along the same things that we've been following? Well, of course they have, but they're Democrats, and so they protect their own. And they did that today when the jury rendered a verdict on verdict watch day one in like record time, less than 6 hours. They had 2 full weeks of testimony, and they just needed a few minutes just to really kind of get a look at this. You're a Democrat, right? You're voting not guilty? You not guilty? How about you? Me, obviously. Of course I'm not guilty. I voted in the primary for Hillary. And so there was a big sort of, round table of the jurors. We got a record time not guilty. And it's really not actually that surprising. I was sort of thinking a lot about this. My gut from day one was always, man, this jury is really, really bad. And today there's going to be a lot of conversation about why this happened and what does this mean and what's John Durham going to do? And is there anything that can happen moving forward? And we're going to go through all the questions and do all the heavy lifting. But we are going to start by really sort of recognizing what this is all about. In one lawyer's humble opinion, that happens to be me. You're going to see people talking about materiality, and you're going to talk about whether this was a white lie or not, or whether there was a big conspiracy, or whether there were some bad rulings that Judge Cooper made that really resulted in this verdict, or was it the jury instructions? Was it that good faith exception? What's going on here? They're Democrats, okay? That's what this comes down to. And so I want to start this off by a quick refresher on the type of jury that we're dealing with. And this is not just sort of a political rant or a political tirade, although it may be that as well. But this is reality, right? Lawyers have to think about this. What jurisdictions are they in? Some different jurisdictions are more favorable to, say, personal injury verdicts, while other jurisdictions will laugh at you if you try to bring a personal injury claim. There are some courts in Arizona that we do not want to go to trial in because the judge is a lunatic. There are others where it's a very favorable jurisdiction or the prosecutors are pretty good. And so we have to make a decision, yes or no, based on the jurisdiction. And so that absolutely went into the equation here. Michael Sussmann and his defense team were having this very conversation with their clients. And all of this is now coming to fruition. But this is where I want to start. This happened in Washington, D.C., the D.C. Circuit Court. And this is what it looks like. If you take a look at the demographics over there, I went over to 270towin.com and it tells us the District of Columbia, the only non-state to be enfranchised for presidential elections. And of course, we're talking about a presidential election in this trial. And remember, this is a trial about Michael Sussmann, of course, but it turned into something much bigger. It was the idea that Michael Sussmann was acting on behalf of Hillary Clinton. And Robbie Mook told us that she was the person who approved the leaking of the story to the media at the very beginning. Before this all went public, Hillary Clinton signed off on it. And so, yes, this turned into something that was a political trial. No doubt about it. Michael Sussmann was acting on behalf of Hillary. He was hired by her and he was doing her work. So when the defense makes the argument, or I should say, when the prosecution is asking jurors if they had a problem with Donald Trump and they said yes, that's a problem for this trial, because this trial, if it hurts Hillary, then it helps Trump. And if it's bad for Trump, it's good for Hillary. There's an inverse relationship there. And if you're a Democrat and you're through and through a Democrat, you're blue as can be. You don't want to vote against your own team, do you? And if anybody is doubting this, if there's a conversation about this sort of being overly political, what happens if we just switch the team? What happens if we just made it Republicans instead of Democrats? What if we put Michael Sussmann with a big red MAGA hat on him and sent him through this whole trial? Would you be okay with his activities if he was a Republican? I doubt it. Would you be okay with what he did with the meeting with James Baker, or all of the colluding, all of the text messages? If it were a Republican, I doubt it. And so, of course, it's political. And the reason why it went the way that it did, in my humble opinion, is just because of this. Over in Washington, D.C., we're talking about Hillary and Donald Trump. And this is how they have voted in the last some presidential elections. In 2020, 92% Democrats, according to 270towin.com. 2016, the election that we're talking about here, 90.9%, 91% Democrats. So it's like, what are you supposed to do? If you're a Democrat there and you're like a loud, active Democrat fighting the Democratic fight, you're going to get a pretty favorable jury. And so this is really, in my opinion, what this whole thing comes down to. You take a look at this. It's very consistent. And as we talked about on this channel for many, many weeks now, the selection of the jury was very problematic. And so for those of you who are not familiar with this, we were able to go through this and tease out the jurors. This is the mind map, which is available down in the Linktree description, in the description below. But these were the jurors that we were sort of concerned about. And we don't know what the final makeup was because it's federal court. We don't get to see anything. And they were playing this game of musical chairs. Here we can see that we had several different jurors who were, in my opinion, problematic for the prosecution, but very beneficial for the defense. We had this person, 0586, Treasury Department employee and a DNC Democratic primary donor, literally donated to Democrats. We had another person who was a lawyer, also a Hillary donor. And this person didn't remember really whether she had actually funded 2016 a presidential candidate or whether it was 2020. But she said if she had done it, it would have been for Hillary. And then lastly, we saw 0517, which was a woman who works at the Smithsonian, has a strong dislike for Trump, said that she could not be unbiased if it were Trump or someone on her team. So let's pull this one up specifically, and let me sort of illustrate a point that I was trying to make earlier, perhaps inartfully. But this was the actual sort of close-up. I'm having a difficult time with my screens here today. Here you can see it says, Mr. Keelty says, a juror, you talked about 2016. Obviously, people have strong feelings about that, right? Yes. You answered that you strongly dislike Trump. And she said, and? Like, what's your point? Doesn't everybody here hate Trump? And he said, and that you're not sure you could be impartial. And she said, yeah, if this was someone on his team or something. So the prosecutor said, so this is not neither Mr. Trump nor Clinton are on trial here. You'll hear their names, but they're not on trial. And it's like, that's true, but they kind of are on trial, right? Donald Trump is sort of the subject of this. Michael Sussmann was doing what he did to try to take out Donald Trump. And this is why the defense was saying Putin, Putin, Putin. And Putin was connected with Trump. And that's why all of this was so dangerous. This was a national security issue, and everybody was so freaked out. So you'll see that this is what one juror had to say. And that's just one of three. Now, we don't know who the final jurors were who actually made the votes, because they released jurors and we lost track of which jurors they released and whether they were part of this pool or not. But regardless, you still see, right, somebody from the Peace Corps, somebody else is a government contractor. And when you juxtapose that with the actual underlying demographics, very favorable jury. And for those people who are making the arguments, as we're going to see, we're going to read through some articles from Technofog. I've got Jonathan Turley is in the queue. The Epoch Times is in the queue. We're going to poke around on Twitter. And all these people are making great points, right, about the details, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of the trial, talking about materiality and all sorts of different things that could have gone wrong. And we spent a lot of time here on this channel talking about that good faith exception. We read this into the rule. This was something they had a big sort of fight about, whether good faith could be actually included in the jury instructions. And it was. Remember that Judge Cooper allowed this in, said a defendant's conduct is not willful if it was the result of a good faith understanding that he was acting within the requirements of the law. Isn't that nice? If you have just a good faith understanding that you're acting within the requirements of the law, not guilty. Well, the problem here is Michael Sussmann was a nationally renowned trial lawyer, somebody who was interfacing with the FBI on a regular basis, such that he got an FBI access badge when many other people don't get that. He's a national security lawyer who's interfacing with all these three-letter agencies. So shouldn't he know how this works? But a big part of the defense was that the FBI screwed it up. He's just a good citizen. He was coming here on behalf of his nation, acting as a good citizen, just trying to be helpful. And apparently the jury bought it. Or as I mentioned previously, This is that fake because. This is the because where they can say, yeah, he did something bad, or maybe that was a little bit unethical, or he could have done it better the next go round. But because he was acting in good faith, we're going to let him use the escape hatch and parachute on out of here. So we saw all of that. Now, we'll go through this in a lot more detail. I was very fortunate enough to be invited onto the Megyn Kelly show earlier today. And so I did a very brief conversation with her. It was about 30 minutes or so. We talked through some of these issues. But when I was reading, or when I first got the verdict, a couple things came to my mind. And so I want to sort of share some of my initial thoughts on this. Materiality, we talked about this. Well, let me come back to this. We'll wrap this up because we've got some good articles over from Jonathan Turley and from Technofog. And I want to sort of get a couple other takes on this. But for some brief background, I want to give some shout outs over to the Epoch Times because these two gentlemen were doing a great job over there. Zachary Stieber and John Hawhey put together this article, and they've been live tweeting this over the last several weeks. And so I want to give them a shout out over at the Epoch Times. And what we're going to look at later on in the show when we have some time is Zachary Stieber and the Epoch Times crew. They actually got all of the exhibits over from the trial. So now that this is concluded, these exhibits are now public. And so depending on how interesting they are, we can poke around some of those shortly. But that was over from the Epoch Times. They say the jury came out today, found him not guilty. And we had actually a couple statements coming out from John Durham and some others, but we'll get to those later. Let's go and get some reaction here from Jonathan Turley. So Jonathan Turley, of course, is a constitutional law professor, I believe, and he's got a good take on this. He actually wrote a column a little bit out a while ago, and he points out a couple things. He says, one verdict needs little deliberation. He says it concerns the Department of Justice and the FBI. The trial confirmed what many have long alleged about how top officials eagerly accepted any Russia collusion claims involving Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. Special counsel Durham and their investigation led to the trial. It's an indictment of the department, once again, blind about Hillary's role in all of this. And so Jonathan Turley has some reaction. Technofog has some reaction. I just totally forgot, though. We have the transcripts. What am I talking about here? We have the transcripts that we have got to go through before we can get to reaction. I'm all out of it today, folks. Had a super busy day, and then this verdict came out, and I'm all discombobulated. But we're going to get it together here. Hang tight. So here is the transcript. Now, we've gone through every single line of this transcripts, and so we can't just skip over the final transcript. As painful as it is for us to have to read this, but here it is, the transcript of the jury trial before Judge Cooper. And this is the last one of the day, last one of the trial, in fact. And I got an email from Morning Lisa, and Morning Lisa's like, this is the last transcript. And I felt a little bit heartbroken over what we've been through these last couple weeks. But she sent it over, and it was starting at 9:29 a.m. And this is important because remember, when we left off on this on Friday, it was very, very quick deliberation. We had closing arguments on Friday. The judge had a 3-day Memorial weekend he had to attend to. His wife was screaming at him from the van, and he needed to leave like sharp at 2 o'clock. And so he left, and the jurors continued to deliberate right at about, I think it was about 2 o'clock, from about a couple hours, and then they left early on Friday. So they had about 2 hours on Friday, and then they had like 4 hours today, like maybe. So it was less than 6 hours. And if you sort of take the court time and all of it, very, very quickly, which is a big reason, I think, that it wasn't about any of the other issues. It really wasn't about good faith. It really wasn't about materiality. It could have been. It was the jurors just shooting from their gut. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. They elected a 4-person. They had a brief conversation about this. Many people probably had a bunch of different reasons why they voted the way they did, but they weren't sitting there going through multiple exhibits, right? Nobody was looking through the jury instructions saying, well, maybe what about this good faith thing? And they're all going, oh, who is this person? All right, open it up to good faith. There's not enough time for that. That would have taken like a couple days just to get a group of people situated to have a conversation about that if there was a disagreement. I don't think there was a disagreement. I think they went in there, they went around. You may have had a couple people that were like, well, I don't understand this and I don't understand that. Maybe you've got the video game guy, he's 25. He wants to play Elden Ring. He's like, all these people say not guilty, not guilty. I got to get back to leveling up my character. Who knows? But it happened very quickly. If there was a disagreement, it wasn't very solid. There wasn't somebody who was sitting there saying that I am a hard guilty, right? Obviously, that wasn't the case because nobody dug their heels in, and it got wrapped up in basically less than half of a day. It's absolutely wild. For hundreds of exhibits, very complex testimony, FBI special agents, we had the whole litany. And the prosecutor during closing arguments even came out and said something like, this isn't even a close case. And I know prosecutors say that all the time, but I happen to believe him this time because I read through every single transcript with you here. We know it wasn't even a close case. The tentacles go far and wide and deep, and there was some nefariousness happening here, no question about it. And if you're somebody who says, well, there really wasn't, I would just ask you, just be reasonable for a second and just flip the party on the other side. What if this was all a bunch of Republicans? I'd still be outraged. I still say this is beneath America and it should be rooted out. Meanwhile, people who go out, urinating in public or something, right? They get charged with a class 1 misdemeanor. Your son or daughter gets a DUI or domestic violence charge. They get into an argument in college. They're going to get prosecuted and charged with a crime. You spread misinformation or disinformation around this country. You post something unlawful or illegal on Twitter that is unlawful to them, right? Not against the law, but something that they have prohibited. Consequences for you, right? I've gotten strikes here for misinformation. I've gotten thrown off of platforms for misinformation and being, quote, dangerous. But if you're doing it as part of the national security apparatus, if you're a lawyer who's a national security law firm at a national security law firm who works for Hillary Clinton, you're basically immune. You can go and lie to the FBI. You can concoct literal disinformation and misinformation, create white papers, bill your time to a campaign for it, get paid for it, lie about it, know that the whole thing is just going to be drawn out over 6 years. And then when you do finally get your day in court, what's going to happen? A jury of your peers, fellow Democrats who go to the same cocktail parties as you do, who believe in the same causes as you do, who think that Putin is an enemy to America like you do, is now going to make sure that you are acquitted because you're on their team. And that's exactly what we saw. Now, if you just flip that, if you said, what happens if we put a bunch of Republican slogans on every one of these characters? We turn the Obama FBI into the Trump FBI. Would you be okay with any of this happening? I certainly wouldn't. But it did. And nobody got in trouble for it. And nobody's going to get in trouble for it. And we're going to talk further about that. But let's take a look at the transcripts here and see what we've got. You see that this came out. All of the prosecutors are in the house. All of the defense attorneys are in the house. And shout out to morning court reporter Lisa. We very much appreciated all of your transcription efforts throughout these last 2 weeks. And then we see the courtroom deputy announce bright and early this morning, Your Honor, this is a case of Michael Sussmann. And the prosecutor says, good morning, Your Honor. We're all here. Court says, okay, good morning. Berkowitz for the defense says, we're all here. And the court notices, says, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a chance to catch their breath over the weekend. The jury is present and deliberating. We received 2 notes at the very end of the day on Friday, which I will read for the record. 2 questions in the same note. The first question, to deliver a verdict, does the jury need to have a consensus on each element, the 5 elements of the offense, or just the consensus on the verdict? Okay, so they all sort of, sounds like they agree. This is a weird question. All right, let's see what the judge does with this. As to the first question, the court has printed out a proposed response. They say, in order to reach a guilty verdict, each of you must find that the government has proven all 5 elements of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt. In order to reach a not guilty verdict, each of you must find that the government has not proven one or more of the elements, 5 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. You need not agree on which element the government has failed to prove. Judge says, yeah, I think that answers the question. Any comments? Defense says, no comments from us. I think that's correct. And the court says, okay. The Philippus, nothing from them either. And they say, all right, we're going to send that back to the court. And so let's see if we can sort of tease out what's happening here. Sounds like they have, the question is an interesting question. To deliver a verdict, does the jury need to have a consensus on each element, the 5 elements of the offense, or just a consensus on the verdict? And they're kind of the same, right? Or like you can't, everybody's got to have a consensus on all of the elements. So like, for example, if let's say one juror, everybody agreed he's not guilty. I'm sorry, let's say everybody agreed he was guilty. This is why it's confusing. Because they're all saying not guilty, right? They're all saying not guilty. This is why it's so funny. They're all saying not guilty, but there's a juror who probably is sort of disagreeing on some of the elements. So one juror is probably like, but he did do that, and he did do that. So now what do we do with this? And so she's saying, how do we sort of untangle one from the other, which is sort of a funny question. The judge explains it. I think it's a good explanation. It goes back. Court says, okay, we're going to send that back. Now, our records do not have government exhibits 306 or 403 even being referenced, let alone admitted. Do you folks have a different recollection of that? Your Honor, we don't have a different record. That's, I think, our record as well. So they're talking about two exhibits. The defense says, I think one of the exhibits is also Defense Exhibit 436. I don't know if they have that one, but I'm assuming they have them available if that's in evidence. Okay, well, we'll just let them know those exhibits are not admitted into evidence and no, you don't get them. So it sounds like the second note was about getting access to those exhibits. Berkowitz for the defense says, Your Honor, I'm told that Government Exhibits 403 is Defense Exhibit 436, which was admitted into evidence. It was one that likely went in as part of our group admission at the end, so they may not be familiar. So any objection to that? No. Any objection, any record of that? Berkowitz is trying to find it. So a discussion takes place off the record. They're looking for records. So it sounds like the court jurors wanted some additional documents and they're trying to figure out what those are. So they say, well, we can't find the other one. So they're going to leave it at 436. They're going to send that document back and stick around. So let's see. Well, there's 1,000 exhibits. We'll see at the end of the show if we can find that specific exhibit, see what that is. Courtroom deputy says, we'll send that back. They're on recess. And gosh, immediately. All right, good morning, everybody. We received a note at 11:05 a.m. from the foreperson indicating the jury has reached a verdict. So we started at 9:29. And so we had a couple questions. And within about an hour and a half, and they're sitting around, they're sitting around kind of chit-chatting for a while. They get a verdict. You sure on? Yeah, not guilty. Not easy. Easy. And remember, one of the jurors has her daughter on Michael Sussmann's crew team, I think. So they'll be having a nice conversation during practice on Saturday morning. So they call the jurors back in. The court says, okay, be seated, everyone. Juror number 2, your foreperson, is that correct? And the foreperson, no idea who it was. Might be the Smithsonian lady who hates Trump. Might be the video game guy. I don't know. Court says, I understand the jury has reached a verdict. Foreperson says, we have. Is your verdict unanimous? Yes, it is. If you could hand the verdict form to Miss Jenkins, please. Long, dramatic pause. Slow crumbling of the papers. And we're listening to the court slowly open the documents. And everybody's wondering what's going to happen here with this Democratic jury in Washington, D.C. Okay, I will hand the form back to you and ask you to read the verdict in open court. So please stand. Mr. Sussmann, please stand. And Mr. Sussmann stands there. He's got this smirk on his face. He's like, so he says, as to count 1, charging, making a false statement on or about September 19, 2016, the jury unanimously find Michael Sussmann not guilty. Womp, 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 womp. Terrible. Okay. Well done, American justice. What? Oh my God. All right. So the judge says, poll the jury. And the DeFilippis says, yeah, great. He's like sitting there just dropping F-bombs under his breath. Durham's, grabbing his suitcase and he's just angry as can be. Juror number 2. Is that your verdict? Yes. How about juror number 3? Yes. And so on and so forth all the way through the rest of them. The court says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you very much for your service. Your service is discharged. I will dismiss you back to the jury room. It is my practice to go back and thank each of you personally. If you would like to wait for 2 or 3 minutes for me to do that, I will. If not, you're free to go. Again, thank you very much for your service. And they exit the courtroom. Court says, all right, well, the court's going to direct the clerk to record the verdict. And Mr. Sussmann, you're excused from all your pretrial conditions. Sussmann's like, thank you, Judge. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen. You're welcome. Have a seat. We're adjourned. They were out of there by noon. By noon. Oh, my goodness. All right. So, I was kind of hoping that maybe we would see something like where people look at justice outside of their political spectrum and they say, gosh, look, I know that our team can be very bad, and they would vote according to the law, sort of, take a look at the facts and the evidence and then make a decision based upon that. But they did not do that. We have here back to Jonathan Turley. So a little bit of the reaction, and he was talking about some of the trial judge rulings, and Turley's obviously a very intelligent person, and I don't mean to throw shade on anything he's talking about, but he's diving into the nuts and bolts of this, right? A lot of people are trying to do sort of a post-mortem and try to understand what happened here, because there might be some usefulness to this. If there's another investigation that can carry on, if John Durham can march forward and start another prosecution or unveil more evidence about X, Y, and Z or whatever, maybe there's some usefulness to that. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. More likely than not, right? This is the end of this Durham saga. Maybe we get a report from him at some point. There's going to be a massive election here soon, and maybe another one in 2024. And when Republicans are in charge, maybe they'll do this same type of garbage, right? Maybe they'll go out there and try to commandeer the FBI and promote a bunch of disinformation to swing elections. Who knows? But what we can see is that there's a lot to unpack, and a lot of people are trying to do that. So one thing that Jonathan Turley was pointing out here, he said, despite the trial judge's ruling imposing the strict limits, and this is something we talked about, right? Is it the narrowing of the scope? Durham's case still revealed new information about how the Russian collusion theory was pushed into the FBI and the media by the Clintons. Perhaps the most ironic moment came when Sussmann's defense outed Clinton as personally approving the campaign effort to spread a baseless lie. Now, if you're following along at home over on the Durham mind map, we saw that very specifically. This is Robbie Mook. Robbie Mook is somebody who testified and was the actual campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. And during his testimony, we saw him basically skewer Hillary. He said that she was the person responsible for giving the thumbs up on the story. So this is Robbie Mook, the campaign manager, and more evidence about what was happening here. During his testimony, here's what he said. Prosecutor said, who was the highest member of the campaign who either was involved or approved the decision? And what decision was that? It was to give the information to a reporter. These white papers, all of these documents. Who decided to turn that over to the New York Times and others? And he says, well, we discussed it and then we made that decision. So he's talking about himself and other people in the Clinton entourage, people like Jake Sullivan and John Podesta and others. But the prosecutor said, who was the highest member of the campaign who either was involved or approved the decisions? Robbie Mook says, well, John and I were involved, meaning John Podesta. I discussed it with Hillary as well, but I believe I discussed it with her after we kind of discussed it and made the decision. Prosecutor says, so you told Miss Clinton, we want to give this to the media? Robbie Mook said, I don't remember the substance of the conversation, but notionally the discussion was, hey, we have this and we want to share it with a reporter. And how did Miss Clinton respond? Says the prosecutor. She agreed to that, right? So she approved it. And it turns out that it was all just fake hogwash. Okay. The whole thing was not even legitimate. Donald Trump responded to that after we learned that came out in testimony. This article came over from the Epoch Times. I took a screenshot of it some time ago. Donald Trump asks, where do I get my reputation back? After revealing testimony from the Clinton campaign. It's a great question. It was all smears. It was all literal disinformation. They dropped it as an October surprise. That tweet came out from the Hillary team. If you remember, and I'm really flying around the mind map right now, but you remember that was down here, I think in evidence, the closed issues. This tweet, Jake Sullivan posted this tweet back on October 31st, 2016. This was the October surprise. This was Hillary Clinton delivering all of this news. Now, this didn't really make it into trial because it was most of this conversation, this line of questioning about conspiracies and about all the different tentacles, all of the people at the FBI involved in this. The judge kind of said, that's pretty damaging. There's a rule called the Rule 403, Federal Rules of Evidence, and it basically says that if evidence is more prejudicial than it is probative, if it's too harmful rather than helpful, if it confuses or misleads the jurors, then the judge is going to exclude it under Rule 403. And this is like one of the rules that everybody knows, right? Rule 403, every single lawyer should, basically know that in one way, shape, or form, because you get quizzed on it out the wazoo. So it's a general catch-all rule. And the judge, anytime something kind of popped up and said, hey, this is, this might be problematic here, for the jurors, it was basically excluded. And there's some good reason for that, because the only criminal charge in this case was lying to the FBI, right? There wasn't a conspiracy charge. There wasn't a lot in here for the judge to say, that is relevant to the crime, because the only crime here was about that one meeting lying to the FBI. Now, I almost zoomed out on this, but when this was posted, some of this message got into trial. Now, I think they actually redacted this bottom part of it. So the initial statement came out from Jake Sullivan. This was, at the time, one of Hillary Clinton's advisors. Jake Sullivan is now over at the White House. He's the national security advisor for the Biden team. They basically just go from one administration to another and just bounce around from, household to household. But he posted this. He's our national security advisor. Okay, we got to just pause on that for a minute. This guy is supposed to be very smart, very intelligent, and be able to give good advice about intelligence that implicate national security. So he should have some pretty good judgment and some pretty good technical capabilities that would allow him to do a good job in that role, right? So we can take a look at his track record. What has he done or said or proffered forward to the rest of us out in America? And how did that fare over the last several years? Was it verified or was it not? Was it legitimate or not? Well, we've got one example of this, as we can see here. Hillary Clinton, her account, and this is the same thing that Robbie Mook checked off, saying she approved this. She said this on her account. Jake Sullivan wrote it. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank. Okay? Total misinformation, total disinformation. Not actually accurate. FBI knew this right away, but she posted it on Twitter. Donald Trump didn't post anything like that on Twitter, to my knowledge, saying that he's got bona fide evidence that there is a secret connection between Hillary and something like that, right? He was joking all the time. Yeah, hey, Russia, if you're listening, release those emails and all that stuff, right? No doubt about it. He was rubbing her nose in it. So she needed something to rub his nose in. And we saw this actually come out in trial. Fusion GPS was this organization that was actually hired as a consultant for Perkins Coie. And what they did is they were communicating with the media. They said, stop talking about Hillary's emails. Start talking about Donald Trump's secret Alpha Bank connection. And so when that started to hit the media, we saw that Hillary and others were really sort of streamlining it. They were the ones leading the charge. Jake Sullivan posted this. Statement from Jake Sullivan on new report exposing Trump's secret line of communication to Russia. All fake, not true at all. All literal disinformation. In response to a new report from Slate, okay? Right? Showing the Trump organization has a secret server. That's Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor. He reads Slate in the morning to get his national security updates. Says it's registered to Trump Tower. It's been covertly communicating with Russia, and says Hillary senior policy advisor Jake Sullivan. Says, quote, this could be the most direct link yet between Donald Trump and Moscow. Total nonsense. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the organization. The secret hotline may be the key to unlocking the mystery of Trump's ties to Russia. October 31st, the election's a couple days away. It certainly seems the Trump organization felt it had something to hide, given that it apparently took steps to conceal the link when it was discovered by journalists. There was no link. Alpha Bank, Yoda phones, none of it was real. It was all fake, but they ran with it anyways, and they created it. I'm going to show you Fusion GPS right after this because they're still around. Everybody on this mind map, everybody involved in this trial is still around. Hillary Clinton may even run again, for crying out loud. Maybe they join her team again, and they got away with it. So why not? They say here, Jake Sullivan says, and this was redacted, this last paragraph, I think from the actual trial, because it was too prejudicial. It was too Rule 403, which is what I explained previously about this being a fact that was too harmful rather than helpful. So they put a big black redacted box over this last paragraph. Says, quote, This line of communication may help explain Trump's bizarre adoration of Vladimir Putin and endorsement of so many pro-Kremlin positions throughout this campaign. Total smear job. It raises even more troubling questions in light of Russia's masterminding of hacking efforts that are clearly intended to hurt Hillary's campaign. Remember what I said? They're trying to rub Trump's nose in it because he's rubbing hers in it. Now, his is legitimate. Her emails actually were leaked out because they're incompetent and she was using a secret computer server in the bottom of a closet somewhere. So now that hurt her campaign and it really caused a ruffle at the FBI. Maybe something, may have cost her the election, but she's got to reverse the narrative. She's got to flip the script around. Now go after Donald Trump. It's not my emails that are so problematic. It's Trump. And says we can only assume that federal authorities will now explore this direct connection between Trump and Russia as part of their existing probe into Russia's meddling in our election. They posted that, right? And so that's the symbol to all of their compatriots there in the FBI and elsewhere in law enforcement to say, hey, you better run with this thing. Slate has verified it. Meanwhile, what we ended up learning is that all of this it all emanated from the Hillary Clinton campaign through this connection. Hillary hired Perkins Coie, Hillary for America, which was the law firm where Michael Sussmann worked. Mark Elias was the actual campaign lawyer for Hillary Clinton. And Mark Elias was also the guy who represented Kerry and Obama. And so he's been doing this stuff for a long time. What they did is they hired this company called Fusion GPS. They nestled it right under Perkins Coie, which to them was very convenient because it gave them this attorney work product doctrine privilege and attorney client privilege, which sort of insulated their activities. They said, oh no, we're nice and nested under this law firm. We're just a consultant doing legal consulting work. Turns out they weren't doing legal consulting work. They were engaged in all sorts of creation of fictional narratives. They went out and they started working with various assets around the world. People like Rodney Jaffe, who was the chief technology officer there at Newstar, and they had access to DNS data and records from Georgia Tech and all sorts of contracts with the federal government that gave them access to spy on Donald Trump. And they were doing it even when he was president. So to those Democrats doing cartwheels in the street because their corrupt lawyers are now victorious, would you be okay if all of this was still happening if the shoe was on the other foot? If these were all a bunch of Republicans colluding to win elections? Because they're gonna. That's where this is going. Like, are you serious? That's how this has to go, or else the Republicans go extinct. So if you're a Democrat and you start to say, well, this is a one-off, or this is just a bad election, or this was only to stop Trump, or you start justifying this to yourselves, if you even acknowledge that this is problematic behavior in the first place, like there are still Democrats that are like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's the problem here? Michael Sussmann is a good guy. All of this was intended to just go stop collusion. They can't connect the dots that it was all fake and that Sussmann created it. But when you put it all together, you can see it pretty clearly. The prosecutor could see it pretty clearly. Everybody could see it. Those Democratic jurors, they could see it too. But they just didn't want to vote against their own team. But the Republicans now have to know, right? It's all on display how this game works. And if the Republicans want to ever win elections and maintain some semblance of power, they're going to have to start playing these games. Otherwise, they are going to go extinct. That's literally what's going to happen. They've got to get in the ring and start playing around with guys like Mark Elias. Mark Elias is very active right now, and I have not seen a Republican counterpart to him. He's on Twitter all the time, democracy docket, filing motions to intervene. And, we covered him well before the 2020 election, and we saw what happened afterwards. So if the Republicans don't start playing on this level, they're going to lose. It's just a matter of natural selection, right? So the only natural consequence is the current Republicans, if they're not willing to play this down and dirty, the next crop of Republicans will. And that's not good for America. But there's nothing we can do about that now because the standard has essentially been set, and it's not going to be a fair game either, right? The Republicans are not going to get those same DC jurors. They're going to get the DC jurors that look at them and just, they wink wrong and they're convicted instantly because they're associated with Donald Trump. But that's the new America. That's how this is all sort of unfolding. And I've complained long and hard about the politicization of a lot of these trials. and how the jurors start to, become activist jurors in many ways. We talked about this with George Floyd and other criminal cases where you've got people who sort of elbow their way onto juries to make their voices heard. That's not what this is about, okay? Start a YouTube channel if you want to voice your opinion. But we're supposed to have a system of laws where people are prosecuted and evidence is admitted properly and jurors give everybody a fair shake, not make verdicts that nullify the actual reality. So that's where we're at now. And it is going to be, I think, very problematic for the foreseeable future. Country is not in a good shape. I mean, we've got sort of two tiers of justice when it comes to the J6ers. We've got an entire fake January 6th select committee that's now going to be prosecuting the opposing party. I mean, literally, like, they're issuing subpoenas to fellow members of Congress for their phone records and stuff. So we're watching the Justice Department and the FBI. I mean, this case was another major embarrassment for the FBI themselves. I mean, the whole thing is sort of just crumbling around in slow motion. And they got away with it. And they're going to still be out there highly engaged, probably vindicated. I mean, probably glowing from the rooftops, feeling invincible for these next elections. And we'll continue to cover it. But that's a quick recap. That's the transcript. Let's go back to Jonathan Turley and see what else he had to say for us. It says the claim that Donald Trump was engaged with Russia and Alpha Bank was a real tinfoil hat conspiracy without support. Durham previously disclosed how researchers tasked with supporting the claim were afraid it was so unsupported that they would be mocked. We saw a lot of that. Clinton campaign did not seem any concerned at all with even minimal inquiries that might expose the lack of proof. We heard a lot from Mark Elias. Now, Mark Elias, I spent some time talking about him. So Turley says during the trial, General Counsel Mark Elias and campaign manager Robbie Mook both said the campaign trusted the media to push the story. They were right. Slate picked it up. Clinton and one of her aides, Jake Sullivan, now Biden's national security advisor, released statements expressing alarm. Clinton campaign pushed the infamous Steele dossier into the news too. Regardless of what the jury decides, they found it guilty. Not guilty. On the witness stand, FBI general counsel said he didn't remember a bunch of times. I saw a headline earlier. It may have been on Twitter from Turley. The reason I pulled this open is I wanted to show you all of the sort of I don't recalls that existed throughout the trial. Mark Elias basically was his entire testimony. And if you go onto the mind map and you take a look at the actual trial transcript for Mark Elias, you can see that it's filled with I don't recalls, I don't remembers. It's really hard for one of the smartest people in the country. And I say that with all due respect to him, right? I mean, which is a kind of a respectful thing to say, I guess. He's a smart guy. He's well accomplished and he's effective, right? He's actually accomplishing things for the Democrats. Major things. They're in the White House. So when he was testifying, I think we had him here. Yeah, Mark Elias. Lots of I don't recalls. And so I wanted to sort of parse through some of this. They went through a lot of the billing records. I don't believe I did, right? Do you recall this? Do you recall that? And there it is. Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell to me, but I'm sort of aware of that, not from recollection. Mr. Elias, do you have a specific recollection of the date the FBI received the Alpha Bank allegations? No. And do you remember when you briefed members of the campaign about it? Remember who that would be? No, I don't specifically recall. A lot of that throughout his entire testimony. And when he was under examination, they went through every single calendar invite, almost one by one. And they said, hey, do you remember this? No. How about this one? No. How about this one? Okay, but on this one, you billed Hillary for America for this. And on that one, you billed Hillary for America for this, and so on and so forth. But strangely, Mark Elias, one of the most powerful lawyers in America, represented Kerry, represented Obama, represented Hillary, can't remember anything from a giant project he worked on for a very, very long time. Very complicated, doesn't remember. Now, same thing happened with Jim Baker. Jim Baker was the guy who testified right after him. Jim Baker was general counsel for the FBI, and these two were actually texting each other. Sussmann had an FBI badge. That's how much access he had to the FBI. He just didn't even need access, just walked right in, went over to James Baker's office. but he sent several text messages. One of the text messages that Michael Sussmann sent to Jim was about his Twitter position. Sussmann left the FBI, got a Twitter position. I'm sorry, Baker left the FBI, got a Twitter position. Sussmann sent him text messages saying that congratulations on the job, so on and so forth. But James Baker was also somebody who really couldn't remember anything. And we had a lot of testimony from him. The one that was really impactful, I thought, that was going to leave a mark, but that ultimately didn't, was when James Baker came out and said that he's 100% certain that Sussmann said that he's said at that meeting that he was not here on behalf of a client. 100%. But a lot of his testimony was also, I don't recalls and I don't remembers. And this is something that happened over 6 years ago. And so it's very difficult for me to piece 2 and 2 together. And so to be honest, right, even when we were talking through this over the last several weeks, I was a little bit skeptical that we were going to get really anything consequential in terms of a guilty verdict. But I thought candidly that it did start to come together near the conclusion of the case. Remember when we heard from this woman, Corey Arsenault? I thought that closing arguments would have tilted this towards a guilty verdict because it was very, very good. But you have to remember that in order to overcome that cognitive dissonance, I mean, you really got to wake somebody up and make them realize, I actually have to do something that shatters my identity. I'm a Democrat. I have to vote against a fellow Democrat because what he did was dishonest. And that's going to make me, as a fellow Democrat, feel dishonest. And so in order to make somebody do something that shatters that connection, you're going to need some very consequential stuff. And you can even just try this on at home, right? I mean, who's your favorite political candidate? And you find out that they're a totally corrupt person who's spreading literal disinformation, trying to steal an election away by proffering forward something that's totally untrue. And you've got like your heart set for this person, voted for him, donated, campaigned for him, went and phone banked for him. They're going to save America. And it turns out they're liars. And they've been scamming the public this whole time. There's no Alpha Bank. There's no connection. It's all a hoax. So now you have to say, wow, are we the bad guys? Are we the bad guys here? Most people will say, no, I'm not. And they will continue to just find an excuse, a way to thread the needle, a good faith exception. But I was thinking that this may have been enough to sort of do it, right? If you have a bunch of reasonable people, I know we're talking about Democrats here, but a bunch of reasonable people there who can sort of set aside their politics, their entire lives are not identified by their political persuasion, right? Every time a political issue pops up, they don't change their stinking profile picture every single 6 months because a new cause comes up, right? There are other people that sort of live their lives in a different manner. But if you're Democrat or, people who sort of are in this category, let's say a DC Democrat, right? Not a sort of a standard, normal person, but like a DC, Washington, DC Democrat. I was joking, wondering, let's see their Twitter profiles. How many have Ukrainian flags and masks on their profiles? Let's see. I'm just curious. But the point is, in order to shake somebody out of that a little bit, we now have to see if there's enough here. Corey Arsenault was a very, very powerful witness for the government prosecution. This is the Durham team. And she really synthesized everything together, I thought, quite beautifully. She went through the billing records. Corey Arsenault is the summary witness for the government. She came through this thing and subpoenaed Verizon and AT&T phone records and emails. And she got calendar invites. And she got billing records and expense reports. I mean, she got everything. She went through Perkins Coie, got all their records because it was all part of discovery. And she summarized it all for us. And remember, the key date here, September 19th. That's the date of the actual meeting. That's the date of the lie. That's the crime. And we got 3 different entries from Miss Arsenault to show exactly what happened here, to show Michael Sussmann not only created these fake hoaxes, he also bought the thumb drives for them, took them over to the FBI, and he planned the whole thing and billed for it on multiple occasions. And so she proved that for us. And she said, here, I want to show you this billing entry from September 14th. And it's not 2022. This would have been 2016, the 9/14 date. Miss Arsenault asked the prosecutor, Can you walk the jury through this billing record? And she says, I'd be happy to, love to. This one comes from September 14, 2016, and it can be found in government exhibit so-and-so. It is billed to the client, Hillary for America, under the matter general political advice. Got a bill for it on the 14th. Who's the timekeeper for this one here, Corey? Well, it's Michael Sussmann, M. Sussmann. How much time? 6.6 hours. Okay, that's a full day. Michael Sussmann likes to take a long lunch, likes to get in early, leave a little bit early. That was a full day for him. And what's the description, Corey? The description is multiple meetings regarding confidential project, drafting of the white paper, and further meetings and telephone conferences, including with Mark Elias, who doesn't remember anything about anything. So the prosecutor says, oh, that's interesting. Well, okay, so they've got the planning meeting, 6.6 hours, all scheming out on their whiteboards how they're going to concoct this hoax. But then the meeting date comes. Hey, how about on the actual meeting date, 9/19/2016, the date of the meeting between Sussmann and Baker? What happened there? Can you explain this billing entry for us, Corey? Sure. This one on September 19th can be found at another government exhibit. It is billed to the client, Hillary for America, under general political advice. The day of the meeting, he billed Hillary. The timekeeper is listed as M. Sussmann, 3.3 hours. And the description is working communications regarding confidential project. What? So imagine a bunch of Trump lawyers scheming around doing this garbage and then shoveling it down the FBI's gullet before it goes into your gullet through Twitter and Hillary. So, okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, he billed her for that also. So now we're 2 for 2 Hillary bills for this project. And then the icing on the cake, the cherry on top of this whole thing, was the flash drive purchase. And Corey Arsenal, the government's summary witness, hit this one home. And so she walked us through this. It was a beautiful thing. Can you tell us what this is? Oh, it's a disbursement form. Okay, so once Michael Sussmann goes out and has, a double-double, he brings it back and he gives them a receipt. And he says, I got to be reimbursed for this hamburger. And they do. They expense report, and he gets the disbursement report. I paid you for your hamburger. And it says, what is this thing? This is a disbursement report from the billing records over at Perkins Coie. Okay, can you walk the jury through this? What does this say here? She says the client assigned is Hillary for America. The matter is general political advice. The description for the reimbursement, Michael Sussmann got paid for this, is purchase of new single-use flash drives for the secure sharing of files. 9/13/2016. Those are the same hard drives that he delivered to the FBI. PNY 16 gigabyte multi-pack. He likes a deal. So he got a couple of them, and he took those over to the FBI and dropped them off. And he didn't want to come out of pocket for those, so he got a reimbursement form from his law firm, and they paid him out on it. All for Hillary. But then he said that he didn't come to the meeting on behalf of her. He was only there as a good citizen. Give me a stinking break. Now, there was a lot about this on materiality. Okay, I know many people are sort of latching onto that right now. That's all about materiality, and that what that means is they're saying that the FBI wouldn't have changed course regardless of the outcome, or regardless of the lie. If Sussmann said, I'm here on behalf of Hillary, we would have done the same thing as though he said that he's here not on behalf of Hillary. It didn't change anything from our perspective. Now, obviously, I think that's a load of hogwash. We heard from many people here throughout this trial, in particular, Allison Sands, the technical analyst, who I felt really bad for. She was like, I had to get a bunch of cases off my desk, and I was working from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and we were shifting all this stuff around all over the place. And they wouldn't even tell her who the source was. Now, this becomes an FBI problem now, right? Our incompetent FBI had this close hold that they were concocting, where the people at the upper levels in the 7th floor there at FBI headquarters were saying, you continue this investigation. You don't need to know where these materials came from. These white papers, these thumb drives, all of these Russia collusion allegations, it's irrelevant where they came from. Just do your job. Let us handle this information, probably something about a need to know basis like in the movies. And turns out Had they known, it would have caused some serious red flags to go off. They would have said, oh, it's all garbage. It's a political hoax. And something else might have happened, right? This investigation may have gone a whole separate way. But what the defense did, and this was pretty dang artful, is they made this case about the FBI screwing everything up. And the FBI does screw everything up. I mean, they've been doing a pretty terrible job from my records so far. They couldn't protect the Capitol building. They concocted some fake hoax with the Whitmer plot. And now they can't even round up their own agents to testify competently to show that even they got hoaxed and totally taken advantage of. I mean, talk about a black eye for the FBI. I guess anybody can just bring you garbage and hoaxes, and there are no consequences for it, as long as they were acting in good faith or whatever. So I guess just, I mean, it's like, okay, that's the kind of country that we're living in. So the FBI don't even care that they got embarrassed by their own political party. They're all involved in it, right? Andy McCabe and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and the list goes on and on and on. So my goodness. All right. So let's see what else we have. We talked about Jonathan Turley, and oh man, what did I do with Technofog's post? So Technofog had a post. I think I linked that up here. Let's see what Technofog had to say. Big fan of Techno, has been doing great work on this. And he posted on his Substack bright and early when he got the news. So if you are not already a follower of Techno, I'd encourage you to go subscribe to his Substack. I certainly am. He says the acquittal is no surprise. This is a DC jury, after all. He says in that Roger Stone case, we documented how a juror lied to get on a panel. The judge didn't care. And that's sort of the same point I was making earlier, right? The idea was we had one juror get on the Derek Chauvin trial. And he said that he basically lied on his questionnaire, right? On the Derek Chauvin trial, said that he was not involved in certain causes and he didn't participate in certain things, but he did. And he wanted to get on the jury in order to effectuate a political outcome, in my humble opinion. Same story happened with the GM case, right? I'm not going to say her name because I get dinged every time on YouTube, but we covered that one in depth, right? The islands casing and the trafficking with Jeffrey. All of that had a juror on there who had a very, very long history of that type of conduct being enacted towards him criminally. And he got on the jury anyways. So we've seen a lot of that, right? Jurors want to get on there these days. It's like, got to make a political statement. People feel like they don't have a voice. And so they just get out there and they get on it. One says, and he also makes a note of somebody being on the same school crew team. School team, yeah. One can't help but think that juror had her own daughter's interest in mind, in cohesion of the crew team, sparing her of teenage drama when she reached the decision. That's a very astute observation there, Technofog. It's true. So a juror's like, I'm going to vote not guilty on this thing because my daughter's going to have a terrible time. Because everybody's going to find out about this. Your mom convicted my dad. It's just going to be the worst. And I think you need some cohesion on the crew team, right? I mean, what if one person's just rowing the opposite direction because she's like, my dad's going to prison. Thanks, Kaylee. Oh, what a stinking country. Techno says, after the verdict was reached, the jury's forewoman held court before the media and expressed her displeasure with the special counsel prosecuting a false statement. Says there are bigger things that affect the nation than a possible lie to the FBI. So it's totally true. It's just a Democrat. It's all it is, right? Saying this is all just much ado about nothing. I explained this many times throughout the trial. The defense hit this one as stinking home run, man. They were saying specifically Putin as often as they could possibly say it. They were saying it many, many times. If they could drop it in there, they would. And it worked. There are bigger things that affect the nation than a possible lie to the FBI. Okay. Well, lady, what about disinformation? What if the Republicans were doing this? What about misinformation? What about lies to the American people coming from a political party? Is that a problem for you? Yes? No? Apparently not. This juror was never impartial, he says. Now, I think Techno went out and actually grabbed some of the text messages. And I mentioned those that the Epoch Times and Zachary Stieber actually assembled all of them. And I have them here. I pulled them open. And if you look at them, you can really scroll through them all in detail. Let's see, this one doesn't seem like it wants to load, which is just great. But there were a lot of them. We had like a redacted document here. This one looks like it's from Newstar. So if we zoom in on this one a little bit. Yeah, Newstar Services. $28,000 invoice. Perkins Coie. Telephone communication. Oh, so it looks like a billing record. Yeah, billing records. Okay, so this one's kind of fun. So we didn't actually get to see most of this during the trial, right? We were just reading from the transcripts. So we didn't actually get to see any of this stuff. But you can see it looks like Perkins Coie, they sent this bill over to Newstar, which was Rodney Jaffe's company. So they're doing legal services for Newstar and Rodney Jaffe. This one's for $23,000. Pretty nice, bill to send out there. A lot more work in May of 2016. Work regarding a confidential project for Newstar. Perkins Coie. Oh, Mike, look at this. Oh my gosh, what a total scam. This, and the jurors just took six hours, less than 6 hours. Here, invoice from Newstar. And for those who are not familiar with this, Newstar is the company that Rodney Jaffe worked at. So when we go down over here and take a look at all of our tentacles, Rodney Jaffe, CTO of Newstar. Newstar was the organization that was working with all of the researchers, Steve DeJong, Georgia Tech, Manos Antonakakis, who actually invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, did not want to testify. They all created the dossiers that they gave over to Michael Sussmann at Perkins Coie through Fusion GPS that delivered it to the FBI. So we see that Perkins had a billing relationship, sort of a connection between Jaffe, Newstar, Fusion. Perkins was even handling their legal bills. And we saw that here redacted, but you can see Perkins, who's the attorney billing this? This one's M. Sussmann. 2.5 hours telephone conferences with others working on a confidential project. More work on a confidential project, prepare meetings, further work on the confidential project. So that's the dossier project, folks. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And it's all there, plain as day, in black and white, in documents. But the jurors still, for some reason, didn't think it was quite enough. So Technofog shared some of those exhibits. Let's see how he wraps it up. Techno, look at this. Go follow Techno. I haven't read the full article. He's talking about Rodney Jaffe says that the special counsel investigation remains open. Special counsel informed the court Jaffe is being looked at closely for violation of 18 U.S. Code, which involves defrauding the government in connection with procurement and contract matters. And, gosh, I'm not sure that it's going to go anywhere. Why would it go anywhere? He's just going to be acquitted by the Democrats in D.C. So if you want to read more from Technofog, certainly go over to his Substack because he's done some very good work on this. And I follow it pretty regularly. But my friends, my goodness, that's the Sussmann trial. A big not guilty. I saw some super chats come in, and so I want to spend some time and see what you think about all of this. I know we have a live chat over on Locals as well, and so I'm pulling those up as we speak also. And we'll spend some time just chatting. So let's see what we've got. Bear Ashby started the show off with a comment, says, "You said I made a bold statement when I said he would be found not guilty. Here's another. Durham is a joke, just like Barr." I think that's from Bear Ashby. So Bear Ashby's one of those Democrats, probably, who's doing a cartwheel. Maybe not a Democrat, I don't know. But somebody who's very happy about this, I think, is what I'm taking from this. But I don't know. I hope you're happy with what you've got, because it's not something that I think is really a good thing, but maybe you do. I don't think that Durham's a joke. I don't think Barr's a joke either. I think that these are people who are trying to prosecute crimes, and some of these crimes have merit and some of them don't. But I mean, we went through the evidence here. I mean, we looked at the mind map. It's a not guilty, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's innocent of anything. I mean, you saw what we saw. So it's just weird, like I said, some of this stuff gets a little bit weird when it becomes more about like the country can suffer as long as our political side wins. We can have some pretty damaging things happen to our FBI and to our Justice Department and to our elections and to disinformation and to the actual candidates who are going to be running the country and all of this. But as long as our political side wins, who cares? And I sort of do care. I mean, I really think that it's kind of a sad state of affairs for the country largely. And I think the Republicans are going to start doing it too. So Bear Ashby, I mean, get ready for it. I mean, it's going to come back your direction. Like the pendulum swings both ways. And when you're sort of around long enough, we're going to see it swing back the other way. And it's going to be gross. It's going to be disgusting. And it's probably going to, continue to contribute to the decimation of the federal government, which is, not necessarily a bad thing because they are ineffective, as we can see. They can't even investigate crimes against their own law enforcement agencies. The FBI can't even get a conviction when they're duped at the front end, which is just pathetic. I mean, it's just embarrassing. Like the whole law enforcement apparatus feels like it's just sort of crumbling down. But, that's the consequence of gigantic, unaccountable bureaucracies. But the pendulum is going to swing the other way. I mean, the Republicans are going to be back in charge. What if Donald Trump's in charge and he starts he says, I've got a bone to pick now with every single one of these people. And he starts doing all sorts of this activity, right? And the Republicans are going to do that. Some other political party will do that. That's the natural consequence of this. It's natural selection. If they don't, they're going to lose. They will continue to lose elections and they're going to continue to be taken advantage of. And so the only thing that they can do to survive is to respond in kind. And it's going to, be a problem for the country, in my humble opinion. But we're going to have to, suffer through it. I am happy that there are alternatives and there are different ways that people are organizing themselves so that they can be sort of immune in many ways from the system. But that's a whole separate tangent. But that was from Bear Ashby. Thank you for the comment, Bear. I appreciate it. I'm glad hopefully you're enjoying it. Sarah ER says, thank you for all that you do. I hate that yet again. Politics determines the outcome instead of facts and law. It's exactly right. It's exactly right. And I feel sort of like a broken record on some of these cases. We talked a lot about Derek Chauvin and all of these other trials that have turned into these political spectacles rather than a presentation of the facts and the evidence. And, Sussmann gets away with it. Okay. Sussmann gets away with it. Elias, Jaffe, all these guys, Hillary, they all get away with it. My fellow Democrats, my fellow citizens I'm not a Democrat, but my fellow citizens out there. Okay. Those same rules do not apply to you and to your children. So you may think that this is a great victory and a great verdict, but they will happily throw your kid in custody for a DUI or for urinating in public or for a domestic violence argument or something like that. Right. So this juror out there are much bigger things to worry about. Like what? Your kid selling marijuana on the street corner somewhere or something like this? It's ridiculous. Okay. This is what our justice system really should be for. It's to prosecute the crimes that are outside of solutions from everyday people like you and me. You and me can help, a young child who needs some help with addiction. We can help somebody who's got anger management problems. We can do something to protect our own communities against people who are violent or we can handle all of that. We can't do anything about anything that happened in this trial. Literally nothing. It's done. No appeals. Durham's going to fizzle out. It's not going to go anywhere. He may release a report or something. Who cares? It's all good. It's just going to all kind of evaporate away unless we demand that it doesn't. Unless we continue to sit here and read through these transcripts and make these stinking mind maps that are memorializing all of their misdeeds for the rest of eternity. And we're going to continue to do it because I'm so irritated with the fact that they keep getting away with it. Nobody else gets that same benefit of the doubt. They do. And they can just act with total immunity and impunity. Meanwhile, college kids around the country are, getting slaps on the wrist and having their lives destroyed for getting into an argument. But these criminals can just roam free with FBI badges and they can do whatever they want because they're in positions of power. It's disgusting behavior. But thank you, Sarah ER, for that. We had James Jarvis says, jury of their peers, right? It's true. It's true. Yeah, it's good. If you're going to be charged with a political crime and you're a Democrat and it's a pro-Democrat crime, you're going to want to do it in DC because you're going to get acquitted. If you're a Trump person, if you're somebody who was a January 6er or something like this, don't even get your hopes up, right? We've seen what happened there. Many of the J6 defendants are now waiving their rights to jury trials or trying to get out of jury trials because they want bench trials because maybe the judge will find in their favor, as we've seen one do. But the DC jurors are not going to do it. They're not going to give people a fair shake because they are too ideologically driven. And I think that's the simple This is the whole takeaway on this whole stinking trial. We can kill ourselves over materiality and jury verdicts and jury instructions and good faith and all of these exceptions. Just a bunch of Democrats being Democrats in favor of a Democrat who was fighting hard for the Democrats. Of course, he's going to be not guilty. Now that I look back on it, it's like maybe should have been more forceful in that prediction. But that was from James Jarvis. 63 Rambler says, imagine one of those jurors getting red-pilled in the future and later realizing what they did in 2022. I don't think it's going to happen, right? And I made this point previously in the week where I said, think about how much people have capitulated and twisted themselves into pretzels to justify any sort of political ideological change, right? We saw people who locked themselves in homes. We were forced to lock ourselves in homes. We were sort of forced to comply with all sorts of mandates and do this and do this and do this. And people just complied willingly, right? Any principles of freedom, any concepts of restricted government, personal autonomy, all of these concepts just sort of flew right out the window. And now we see the consequences of it, right? We see what's happening in the markets. We see what's happening with supply chains. We see what's happening with inflation. You can't print trillions of dollars to print your way out of a problem, but they did. But are any of these people going back and looking at their record and saying, yikes, we screwed up? No, nobody is. Are they ever saying, hey, we shouldn't have done it that way? Has anybody apologized anywhere at all for what they put this entire world through? No, they have not, because they don't think they did anything wrong. And if they think they did something wrong, they just double down on it and they say, no, you're wrong because you don't follow the science because you're an idiot. So are we going to sort of speculate now that we fast forward 2 years? Let's say Donald Trump's back in the White House. Donald Trump's the executive branch now. He wants to go through and reopen all of this stuff. Why don't you turn those records over? And why don't we investigate you? And why doesn't Donald Trump create his own fake white papers with a bunch of fake law firm consultants and go after the Democrats? I mean, I wouldn't even be mad at him, right? He has to do that. The Republicans have to do that, or else they're going to lose, because this is the rules that the Democrats are playing by, right? It's like in any game, if your opponent has 35 more moves and they're better at all of them than you, you're going to lose the game. It's just the reality of it. So Trump's going to do it. The Democrats are going to have to face a reckoning very soon. The Republicans, honestly, I'm not excited about this happening in our country, but let's put the hat on as a political operator, somebody who just says, let's go and just become hardcore Republican winners, regardless of American values or virtues or the Constitution or due process or equal protection or any of those things. Let's forget about all of that because the Democrats have forgotten about all of that. So who cares? We're not playing according to those rules anymore. We're playing to a different set of rules. It's guerrilla politics now. And we're going to be utilizing the FBI, the internet, DNS expert consultants. We're going to be concocting whatever we can to create a narrative that serves us. And so if the Republicans are going to take those same tools, they should use them. They should do them if they want to win and stay in power, because they would be stupid not to. And of course, that is going to happen. There will be consequences for that. It will probably accelerate the dismantling of the American system to some degree as more and more people become shattered. We can't even come together as Americans now and agree on the due process of law. We can't even agree on how our justice system should work. And holy moly, if that's the last institution that fails, and now you've got people saying, you know what, I'm not going to show up to court anymore. I don't think that my warrant is valid because I've lost total faith in the judicial system. Well, there goes your police department. There goes your prosecution department, because you're going to have a lot of people that just voluntarily unplug from the system because it's not just. It's political. You have people who just make their votes made based on whatever is sort of hot at the moment. Right now, Putin's hot. Anti-Trump is hot. DC jurors love that stuff. Same thing happened to Chauvin, and you're going to see it happen again and again and again as more of these trials become politicized, as more of this becomes about getting jurors on the panel in order to effectuate the outcome. And I recognize that us covering it, right? Maybe that's part of the problem. It's like maybe all these people talking about trials is causing it to be politicized. And so then now you have to balance that out with, well, what about public access to a trial? We need to be able to see what happens in there, but now it's becoming politicized. And so we're kind of caught in this new problem, this new system that is not what we used to see, right? 50 years ago, we weren't live streaming trials live all over the place. But we're uncovering, and we're still not, right? We still didn't live stream this trial. This is all still closed and under seal, and it's under seal so that we don't see it by design. So there's a whole slew of problems to get to. That's a great comment. That came in from 63 Rambler. I'm not sure that they're going to ever realize what they've done. Mary Beckering became a member. Thank you for becoming a member, Mary. I'm going to be putting out some more members only and some paywalled content on Locals and on YouTube. Now that we're sort of through the Sussmann saga, I kind of have a plan, I think, to create more content. I will see how it works out. You know how I am. You know how this goes. James Jarvis says, can there be a law to leave out political parties? So no, I mean, Zulu actually had a good comment on this a long time ago, and I see Zulu's in the chat. Zulu says, Zulu said previously, he was kind of being Zulu, and he sent in a comment something like, oh, I guess all Democrats should be precluded off the jury. Huh, Rob? Okay, Zulu. That's not exactly what I meant, but it's a good point, right? It's a good question. And he was asking something, sort of that I was thinking a lot about. What does a prosecutor do in a Democratic jurisdiction where you have a very favorable Democratic client and almost all the jurors are going to be Democrats? Now you just have to sort of say, well, we got to pick the less bad Democrats, right? The people who promise to be more impartial, if there is such a thing. But it's something that did absolutely come up, and the prosecution wanted to insert a little additional jury instruction in there that said specifically, you cannot nullify this, a jury nullification instruction. And the judge said, no, you don't need it. It's not part of the standard rules. So they're not going to make this more about politics in an already political trial. That was the defense attorney's objection to this, basically. The defense said, Judge, this is already highly political, and we don't need to make this even more political by calling attention to the political nature of the trial. And so they just left that all out. The prosecution wanted the judge to sort of instruct the jurors. This is political, but just because it's political doesn't mean that you can just go and vote not guilty. Like you cannot nullify this. Judge said, no, it's too much. So the defense won that. And the defense won a lot of pretty good arguments, actually. I mean, they had some pretty favorable rulings on their behalf, and it was obviously something that didn't work out for them. But that was from James Jarvis. 63 Rambler said, Rob, if prosecution closed with, ask yourself, how would process this if it was done by the other candidate's campaign? Would that elicit objections from the defense? Yeah, probably. All of that, most of that political stuff was not allowed to come in, right? This really wasn't a political trial, even though it was a political trial. Like, we all knew it, the jurors knew it, but the court didn't allow it to be that. The court said that the scope of this is pretty narrow, and that anything that is overtly political is not allowed. And I sort of mentioned that earlier at the start of the show when we were talking about Hillary's tweet. So 63, there was a tweet that Hillary Clinton put out, and the judge allowed most of it to come in except that bottom paragraph, largely because that bottom paragraph was like too much politics. It was a little bit too political. And the judge just said, no, it's too prejudicial. It's going to bias the jurors in a way that's going to cause their verdict to be not legitimate. It's going to be harmful to their job. And he said, no, can't come in. But I agree, right? Like, it's an interesting question, because I think it's bad behavior regardless of what political party does it. I think it's not okay to take fake hoaxes to the FBI and to try to swing an election on behalf of that. So regardless of the political party, I wouldn't want Trump doing that. I wouldn't want anybody doing that. Ronnie Cole says, I heard ballots are still coming in on the verdict. Yeah, so that's a good one, Ronnie. Do we ever figure out what's happening in Pennsylvania? Is Oz going to the Senate? Great Oz, Dr. Oz, still counting the ballots. Well, maybe we'll wake up tomorrow morning, Ronnie Cole, and we'll see a guilty verdict. We'll see some graphs change. We'll see like a big spike of guilty verdict votes. And then Sussmann will just wake up in handcuffs. Maybe that'll happen. But I wouldn't hold my breath on that. But thank you, Ronnie, for the dono there. Elaine Smith says, a little something to help with the decriminalized pot legal funds. So thank you, Elaine Smith. A little something to help with the decriminalized pot legal funds. So in Arizona, it's basically decriminalized. We have we have a medical program here and we have a recreational program here, and you still can get in trouble with marijuana, no doubt about it, but it's largely decriminalized. So you can still be cited for a crime, smoking out in public and all of that stuff, but you're not going to be, it used to be a couple short years ago, a felony, okay? Possession of marijuana, the green leafy bud, felony, okay? Prison. It was crazy in Arizona. And then we got medical marijuana, and then now it is decriminalized. And so you can go down recreationally and just buy whatever you want down there and enjoy yourself as it should be. And that was from Elaine Smith. But I know there are still other parts of the country, and there are federal laws that still make this thing a crime. One of the big things I thought the Republicans really, really botched when they were with Trump is they should have done a decriminalization effort across the board. Part of a justice reform effort, they should have seized that mantle, taken over that initiative, decriminalized marijuana, seized that. It's already going to happen. And I think it would have gotten them a lot of sort of new, younger voters, people who are interested in, less government regulation of that type of activity. And it would have been a smart move. But of course, they didn't do that. So thank you, Elaine Smith. And then we had another one come in from 63 Rambler, says, Sam Harris ate his anti-Trump words one syllable at a time after Afghanistan. It can happen. So that's interesting. I don't watch or follow a lot of, what did I do? Oh, I put 2 open chats on locals like an idiot. All right. So what I was saying is I don't watch a lot of Sam Harris. He is an interesting guy. I have watched some of his stuff, but he's, Did he acknowledge it? Like, did he come out and say, I'm sorry? He did, actually. Didn't he post something on Twitter? That's right. Sam Harris, he did acknowledge that. So that's a good example. Okay. Right. I try to acknowledge when I make mistakes. Maybe you can think of some, but I mean, I try to say, I try to live my life being willing to shed an old idea. I've talked about it like a t-shirt. If something is working and then it's not working anymore, okay, well, you don't have to be married to that thing. Just change it. Get rid of it. Okay, try it. And you've seen it here on this channel. I've changed things a million times. And I'm still going to change things because I'm still experimenting and learning. And if I can learn something, if somebody comes out and says, yeah, your candidate did this horrific thing, and I look into it and I vet it, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's pretty bad. And I'm willing to sort of abandon that person or abandon that ideology. My politics have changed dramatically from when I was a boy. And that's okay. I think that's a beautiful thing. I hope they continue to change. If I fast forward 25 years from now and I'm still the same guy with the same political opinions, that's kind of a stupid thing, isn't it? Because the world is a lot more complicated and I have not figured it all out just yet. I don't think anybody ever does. So for those who want to dig their heels in and just say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican or whatever, and vote accordingly, that's fine. But I mean, you can be a Democrat all the way as on the boat as it sinks to the bottom of the Potomac. But that's not how I want to live. So, Sam Harris and others who actually come back out and kind of own that change, I think is a good thing. And I hope to emulate that, right? I hope to come out and say, totally screwed that one up, because that's what this whole process is about. It's not about the final conclusion. It's about the journey, right? We're all on the journey. We're all trying to figure this out. We sort of learn in public together. We explore these ideas together. Sometimes we come up with something that feels good. Sometimes doesn't feel good. Sometimes it answers some questions. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's just part of the conversation. And it sounds like Sam Harris is having that about Biden, and many other people are. Many people are looking at Biden and wondering what the hell happened. So those were the great super chats that came in on YouTube. I'm over on locals, and it doesn't look like I opened up a comment thread like just a dingbat, but I do see. Wait, who is in here? Okay, so I see Vientikis is in here. Jumpin' Jeff's in here. And we have 5309 says, judges in D.C. are no longer honorable. They refuse to see they have conflicts in trying cases, and this should have been tried in a different jurisdiction. Robert Barnes and Richard Barris have shown it is impossible to get a fair and impartial jury in D.C. Look at Roger Stone. Look at the J6 prisoners. We need to make major changes because the two-tier system is so evident, and it's awful to see. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great comment there from 5309 from Coucher. And they're saying exactly sort of what I was explaining earlier, that this is becoming majorly political. We're seeing multiple tiers of justice. The J6ers, I mean, We've covered many of those cases and those trials and that investigation. We've talked about the people who have been blamed for things they didn't do, and it's taking place in DC. There is a massive bifurcation of justice there. If you're a Republican and conservative, you're an insurrectionist. You're somebody who should be stripped of citizenship and stripped of your humanity because you committed the worst offense ever. You don't even get out of custody, many people. But if you're Michael Sussmann and you're part of a cabal of people that wanted to change an election by putting forward a literal fake hoax story on October 31st, no problem at all. You're good to go. We should be focused on bigger things, says the four-person juror. Give me a break. We all know what's going on here. They know what's going on here. It's essentially political. It's a political battle. One side versus the other. We have Vientikis shared this one over on our locals community. He posted this, says, live look at the Sussmann jury outside the DC courthouse. It's a bunch of Ronald McDonalds. And they're probably going over there to get a whole slew of Big Macs along with Mark Elias and Michael Sussmann. And that's a good comment and a good way to wrap things up there. Thank you, Vientikis, for sharing that. That's all coming in over from our locals community at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We have Kincaid says, not considering the politics of peers is simply being willfully ignorant. And Moose in the house. Yes, I think that's true, Kincaid. Yeah, you got to consider the politics because this is a political trial, right? Think about it. So like in the GM case that we covered, what were people looking at for jurors? How many were female? How many were male? What were people looking at in the Derek Chauvin trial? How many were white? How many were black? Same thing happening here. How many are Democrats? How many are Republicans? And guess what? It matters. And there were 0 Republicans as far as I could tell. And there were some very staunch Democrats, if not unanimous, strong Democrats on the panel. So it's not improper to ask about that at all. I think it's absolutely necessary. And if you don't consider it, you kind of are being willfully ignorant. Moose in the house says Repubs can't do the same thing because the bureaucracy will not work to support the Repubs, but only work for the Dems, which is very true, right? They have an institutional advantage, which is why the Republicans are losing everywhere they turn. And they will continue to do so until they regain that institutional advantage. But look, it doesn't take much, right? What happens if there's a red wave in any of one of these next 2 elections? We get the Senate, the House, and the White House all going red. What happens? Well, they just clean house. Clean house. And maybe they do it this time. We'll see. And the Democrats will have to face the consequences. They should form their own fake select committees with fake charters and go investigate whatever fake crimes they want there. Create their own dossiers, white papers. I mean, shoot, maybe we can write a white paper here together. I can come up with a bunch of ideas, a bunch of fake garbage. Easy. I can write like a fake fictional novel about whoever the next candidate is. Beto. What's Beto doing? Oh, Beto and I don't know, pick a country. Pick any one of them. Bolivia. Okay, Beto and Bolivia. Come up with a whole stinking white paper dossier story about this whole thing. Funnel it to some lawyer, give it to the FBI. They don't know anything about anything or what they're doing. So yeah, maybe they'll run with it. No consequences for it at all. All right. I'm just joking, obviously, but that is a summation of the Michael Sussmann saga. And we covered a lot of ground here. We had a super chat just come in here from Andrew Passman. It says, the more the Democrats pull this, the more people on the left will not believe them anymore and show up to vote, keeping them out of office. We can only hope. Well, that was sort of my appeal to normalcy. The idea that, you'd get some people on the jury panel that would say, look, I'm a Democrat, but that was like gross. That was pretty gross behavior. What happened here? It was clear as day what you did. And so, I'm going to swallow my pride. I'm going to take a self-own and I'm going to do the right thing here. I'm going to go convict you because you did something criminal. And we shouldn't have that in America. And whether you say that Michael Sussmann should get, 30 years in prison or 10 years in prison or 0 days in prison, regardless of whatever that is, it was a wrong thing to do. And so you sort of hope that people would vote that way in order to protect the functional operation of America. But evidently, that's not all that important anymore. So will they change? Are they going to go and vote? And by the way, Andrew, like they've got to know about it first, right? People have to know about this stuff before they can go vote. How many Democrats know who Michael Sussmann is? How many people in the media have been following this trial? They don't know anything about this. All they know is that some lunatic prosecutor named John Durham, who's a Trumper, who's a MAGA person, an ultra MAGA king, went out and tried to take out some Democrats, and he lost. Why? Because the Democrats are just virtuous people. That's all they do. They were just trying to help America. There was no nefariousness here. As you can see, not guilty verdict. Silly goose. So what are you talking about? And so Andrew, right, if that's the status, if that's the situation, if nobody even knows about this, how can we presume the Democrats are going to get out there and just vote for change, to vote to do the right thing? Is that something that could happen reasonably? I doubt it. Unfortunately, I doubt it. I don't think that that is a realistic outcome. But I think that is it for us, my friends. Great last comment from Andrew Passman. And we're going to move on from the saga, from the Sussmann saga. So tomorrow we'll be back. I don't even know what we're talking about. I don't even know what else has been going on because we've been so buried in the Sussmann saga. But it is now coming to a close. Not guilty. Congratulations to the Democrats out there. Enjoy it while you can, because it's, you know, the pendulum's going to swing the other way. It always does. It always does. And it's going to this time. And there will be consequences for it. And I think America is ultimately the party that suffers, which is you and me, as these people who get to operate on a different level with a different system of justice continue to run around our national security infrastructure with total impunity. No consequences at all. But we'll continue to cover it because they will be back again. Remember, we are not losing touch of Mark Elias or Michael Sussmann. These people may go underground a little bit for the foreseeable future. Not Mark Elias. He's actually out there pretty aggressive over at Democracy Docket. But we are going to continue to follow them. They're going to be inserting themselves in our political lives for the foreseeable future. We'll continue to cover it. I appreciate you being here with us as we've been doing that. Thank you for all of the support on the show. Welcome to our new members on YouTube, on Locals. We will be back again to do a live tomorrow. I don't even know what we're talking about, but we'll be back here. Same time, same place, and I hope you join us on that journey, because even though saga is done here with Sussmann, there's a lot more nefariousness out there that we need to attend to with police and prosecutors and judges and, of course, the politicians. And so we'll be back here to do it. If you haven't already subscribed, I would love it if you subscribed to our channel. That way you can find us tomorrow when you come back. Otherwise, my friends, that's it for me for the day. Have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you all right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.